black CEO, forced out a first-class seat for white traveler. Then he axed a $500M airline deal. Hello everyone, before we begin today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel is losing traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can help us. It's quick, free, and allows us to continue bringing you great content. Your support means everything. Let's keep this channel growing collectively. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the story. You need to move. Now. The sentence cracked through the calm of the first-class cabin like a tray of glass slipping off a counter. Heads snapped up. Conversations froze mid-word. A row of champagne flutes trembled as the jet bridge door clanged shut behind the last boarding group. The flight attendant stood over him, tall, rigid posture, immaculate bun eyes, sharpened by the certainty of someone who believed she was defending the natural order of the cabin. Her finger pointed at the black man seated in 2A. This seat is assigned to a global elite passenger, she repeated, voice firm, almost rehearsed. He flies this route every week. Please return to business class. A few passengers exchanged glances, the kind that said, well, I knew something was off the moment he sat down. Others lifted their phones slowly, pretending to check notifications, but their lenses drifted toward the unfolding moment. Modern spectators, hungry for quiet humiliation disguised as airline protocol, the man in 2A, Jared Cole, didn't look up right away. He simply closed the leather notebook in his lap with the unhurried precision of someone accustomed to pressure. His suit was dark charcoal, clean lines, understated tailoring. Nothing about him screamed wealth. Nothing needed to. Sir, the flight attendant pressed, tone tightening, I'm not going to ask again. This is not your seat. A beat. It must have been assigned by mistake. The white man standing in the aisle, late 50s, sunburnt forehead, expensive watch shimmering under the cabin LEDs, huffed impatiently. That's my spot, he said, loud enough for 3 rows to hear. I pay for this seat. He clearly doesn't. The word clearly hung in the air like smoke. Someone gasped quietly. Someone else muttered, unbelievable. The man in 3B smirked, angling his phone for a better shot. Jared finally lifted his gaze, calm, composed, not intimidated, not impressed. His boarding pass was already in his hand, but he didn't raise it yet. Instead, he studied the attendant's face, the rigid smile, the defensive posture, the thinly veiled assumption. Then he looked at the man in the aisle, whose annoyance had already transformed into entitlement. Before he could speak, the attendant leaned closer. Sir, don't make this difficult. You people always try to. The cabin went still. A woman in 1C covered her mouth. The man in 4A whispered, did she really just say that? Someone started recording openly now. Jared exhaled through his nose, slow, controlled. He wasn't surprised, only disappointed. He had seen this scene before, in boardrooms, at lounges, at charity galas where polite cruelty hid behind champagne smiles. Yet every time, it landed with the same dull weight. The assumption that dignity had a color, that success had a face, that worth could be measured by the shade of one's skin. He raised his boarding pass. It says 2A, he said evenly. No anger, no tremor, just clarity. The attendant didn't even look at it. Well, get you seated properly, she insisted. Please step aside so Mr. Halden can take his rightful place. Rightful. That word pressed against the cabin walls like pressure before a storm. Jared's eyes shifted once to the window. Outside, ground crew moved with mechanical rhythm, signaling, loading, preparing for departure. Inside, the air seemed to thicken, the subtle hum of the ventilation fading beneath the collective anticipation of strangers waiting to see how far this would go. Sir, the attendant said again, now sharper, business class is still a premium product. You'll be more comfortable there. Comfort. Another word that didn't mean what she thought it meant. Jared stood, slowly, deliberately. The cabin breathed out, mistaking his movement for surrender. The white man in the aisle smirked in triumph, tapping his watch. Knew he didn't belong up here. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change, and we're glad you're here. Now, back to Jared. He stepped aside without raising his voice. No argument. No scene. He walked down the aisle as passengers parted like he carried something dangerous. In a way, he did, because as he reached business class, his phone buzzed with a message from his senior counsel. Airline deal ready for signature. They're asking to confirm announcement time. Jared stared at the screen for a long moment, then typed 2 words, "Stop everything." The aircraft door sealed with a hollow thud, the kind of sound that announces a point of no return. Flight attendants moved through the aisle with forced brightness, closing overhead bins, checking seatbelts, pretending the tension in the cabin wasn't thick enough to cut with a butter knife. But in first class, where a stranger now reclined comfortably in a seat that wasn't his to claim whispers still churned like low static, Jared settled into business class, placing his phone face down on the armrest. He didn't adjust his seat. He didn't reach for the champagne flute the attendant offered with a shaky smile, as if politeness could erase what had already been carved into the air. He simply stared ahead, shoulders still, breath measured. But something had shifted. A quiet chill seemed to move across the cabin, creeping its way up the aisle as if carried by the recycled air. People weren't whispering anymore. They were watching him, the man who'd been displaced without resistance, yet radiated something they couldn't name. Not humiliation, not anger, something colder, sharper, more precise. Behind him, the entitled passenger, Mr. Halden, pressed his call button and barked for a pre-departure drink. "Make it quick," he snapped. "Some of us actually belong up here." The attendant offered a nervous laugh and hurried away. A few passengers exchanged uneasy glances. The spectacle they had enjoyed moments ago now tasted sour. The thrill of someone else's humiliation had curdled into something uncomfortably close to guilt. Jared didn't look back, but he heard it all. The clink of ice being poured, the flustered apologies, the low snicker from 3B, the performative sigh of Halden bragging about elite loyalty status. The plane pushed back from the gate, engines hummed alive, vibrating the floor beneath Jared's shoes. He loosened his shoulders, leaned his head back, and closed his eyes, but only for a moment, because his phone buzzed again. Rachel, Chief Legal Officer, Media Team. Asking about timing. They want to prep quotes for the press release. Another buzz. VP Operations, partners from Monaco confirmed. $500M, still pending your final green light. Another. Chairman of the airline, excited to announce partnership this week. Call me before takeoff? Jared opened his eyes slowly. A stillness settled across his face. Not the stillness of someone defeated, no slumped shoulders, no clenched jaw. It was the stillness of comprehension, of a decision crystallizing in real time. He picked up his phone, typed a short reply to each message, a single sentence, no explanation, no emotion. Hold all activity until further instructions. Sent, one by one. Delivered. Outside the window, the runway lights stretched in clean, perfect symmetry, white, gold, white leading the aircraft toward the inevitable. The engines roared as the plane began accelerating, slicing through the night with brutal grace. A flight attendant walked past Jared, offering a polite nod, one layered with the awkward guilt of someone who knew she had witnessed something wrong, yet said nothing. Her eyes lingered a beat too long, the kind of look that carried an unspoken question. Who exactly are you? Taxi lights flickered across Jared's face, drawing sharp, fleeting lines of brightness over his calm expression. The plane tilted gently, lifting off the ground. The cabin dipped into a low murmur as people settled in for the flight. But in first class, a single sentence broke through the hum. From Mr. Halden. "See," he bragged loudly. "Order restored." A collective discomfort rustled through the cabin. Jared didn't turn around. He didn't need to. His phone chimed one last time. "Rachel. Understood. Waiting for your final call." Jared breathed out, slow, almost silent. Then he opened his notebook, turned to a clean page, and wrote one line in deliberate, controlled handwriting. "Respect is the foundation of partnership." A line that would soon become the first sentence of a termination notice worth $500 million. At 30,000 feet, the cabin lights dimmed to a warm amber glow, soft enough to lull most passengers toward sleep. But Jared was wide awake, pen poised over the margin of his notebook. He wasn't writing now, just tapping lightly, rhythmically, as if marking time with a memory no one else could hear. This wasn't the first time someone tried to shrink him. But every time before this, he had chosen silence not because he lacked power, but because he understood timing. In business, in life, in survival, timing was everything. The engines hummed beneath the floor, a steady vibration that pulled him backward into the very path that had forged him into the quiet storm he was now. People assumed wealth made a man untouchable. They never looked at what shaped him before the bank accounts, before the titles, before the billion-dollar evaluations. They never wondered what kind of fire made a man so calm in the face of disrespect. Jared could still see it vividly, the cramped apartment in Detroit where winter wind slipped through old window frames. His mother working 2 jobs, sewing uniforms at night until her fingers bled from the needle. His grandmother, voice soft but iron-willed, telling him as he struggled with homework, "The world will try to shrink you, baby. Don't give it permission." He hadn't. Not then. Not now. He built his first logistics algorithm at 17 on a borrowed laptop, with spotty Wi-Fi and a stubbornness that refused to break. At 19, he pitched it to his professor, who told him, "These models are too complex for someone with your background." He built the prototype anyway. At 24, when venture firms dismissed him with polite smiles and coded skepticism, he launched in silence, bootstrapping with freelance coding jobs and relentless grit. By 32, Head built Cole Meridian, the global logistics aviation hybrid that now moved nearly 12% of North America's medical cargo and private freight. Its aircraft fleet spanned 4 continents. Its predictive routing system saved corporations millions. Its valuation crushed rivals who once ignored him. And now? Now his company was poised to execute a $500 million strategic alliance with the very airline that had just treated him like an intruder in their premium cabin. An alliance they needed far more than he did. The partnership promised access to his proprietary software, capable of cutting fuel costs by double digits and slashing turnaround delays. The airline's board had been courting him for months. Its chairman had called him personally, twice, practically begging for an accelerated timeline. Jared had agreed. Not because they deserved it, but because the deal would expand his humanitarian logistics branch, a passion Head built in honor of his mother. Faster cargo meant faster medical supplies. Faster medical supplies meant lives saved. That was the only reason he was willing to lend his innovations to an airline notorious for its internal chaos. But tonight shifted something fundamental. Respect was not negotiable, not when his grandmother's voice still lived in his memory, not when his mother's sacrifice still burned like a quiet anthem under his ribs. A turbulence tremor rippled through the cabin, a quick jolt that made a few passengers gasp. Jared didn't flinch. Instead, he looked down at the page again, the line Head written in part 2. Respect is the foundation of partnership. He drew a single line beneath it, then another. Not angry strokes, measured ones. Behind him, the entitled man in 2A erupted in laughter at something on his tablet, booming, oblivious, smug. The sound carried down the aisle like static. Jared closed the notebook. He wasn't thinking about humiliation. He wasn't thinking about revenge. He was thinking about standards, what it meant to uphold them, what it cost when others failed to. He reached for his phone, scrolling through an internal report sent earlier, a breakdown of the airline's financial vulnerabilities. Fuel inefficiency, aging fleet, investor anxiety. Their dependence on his upcoming partnership was written in every line between the lines. They couldn't survive a major disruption, not now, not with their stock already fragile. A quiet realization settled into him. They think I'm the least powerful person on this plane. He looked up, eyes calm, jaw relaxed. They have no idea. The engines droned on, steady, unaware that somewhere between clouds and darkness, a decision was forming. A decision that would soon cost the airline far more than the price of a first-class seat. It would cost them $500 million, and the illusion of hierarchy they clung to so tightly. The cabin had settled into that strange, mid-flight, quiet, dim lights, hushed conversations, the soft mechanical hum of a machine slicing through the night sky. Trays clicked shut, a few seatbelts unbuckled. The world outside the windows was nothing but black velvet. speckled with distant city lights miles below. But in row 7, Jared sat upright, shoulders squared, as if waiting for a cue only he could hear. The cue arrived. His phone vibrated once. Then again. Then a third time, persistent, insistent, cutting through the quiet. He turned it over. Chairman Holt, Airline Board, ready for your final approval. PR team is standing by. Press release scheduled for 9 a.m. Another message stacked beneath it. Lead negotiator, partnership team, all documents prepared. Just need your signature. Congratulations again, Jared. Congratulations. The word landed awkwardly. A celebration built on a foundation that had cracked only an hour earlier. He scrolled. New messages kept rolling in timelines, contract reminders, details about the joint software integration, even an invitation to the airline's private headquarters for a post-announcement toast. It all felt detached from reality. A reality where he had been told publicly, confidently, unapologetically, that he didn't belong in a seat he paid for. In a space he had every right to occupy. In a cabin he was helping modernize with technology worth more than the aircraft itself. A flight attendant approached timidly, interrupting his thoughts. "Mr. Cole, would you like a warm towel?" she asked. Her voice trembled. She wasn't the one who humiliated him earlier, she knew it, he knew it, but she carried the weight of proximity. Her eyes flicked to the first-class curtain, then back to him, her guilt quiet but unmistakable. "No, thank you," he said gently. She nodded and retreated. Jared breathed in once slow, deep, letting the stale cabin air settle in his lungs. Then he exhaled, controlled and steady, releasing something heavier than breath. Enough. He tapped open his messaging app. A blank field blinked back at him, a cursor waiting for an intention. For weeks, he had envisioned this partnership as expansion, progress, strategy. Now all he saw were the faces staring at him earlier, faces that assumed hierarchy was fixed, that dignity was negotiable, that a black man in 2A was a clerical error waiting to be corrected. He thought of his grandmother again. If they can't give you respect freely, don't give them access cheaply. He typed 2 words. Paused, reread them. Stop everything. Sent. The message left his phone like a trigger pulled in perfect silence. Below the clouds, servers on 3 continents received an alert. Legal teams were frozen mid-preparation. PR drafts were halted in their final stages. Internal systems flagged a deal status change and initiated contingency protocols. In the cockpit, the captain made a calm announcement about turbulence ahead. In first class, Halden complained loudly about the temperature being inconsistent. In business class, Jared placed his phone face down again. He didn't need to watch the consequences unfold. The cabin lights flickered slightly as passengers adjusted blankets, unaware that somewhere inside the aircraft's digital ether, the fate of a $500 million alliance had just entered freefall. Moments later, Rachel, his chief legal officer, responded. "Rachel, is this a temporary pause or full stop? Airline is pushing hard behind the scenes. They're desperate for this deal. Confirm intent." Jared lifted his gaze toward the curtain separating him from first class. Someone laughed on the other side, Halden's voice unmistakable. "Some order you have to maintain," he bragged loudly. "Otherwise these cabins lose their standard." Jared tapped the screen again. "Jared, full stop. Do not proceed." The cursor blinked once. Then the message sent. A clean, final, irreversible line. The engines hummed on, steady, unaware that in a single quiet moment, Jared Cole had just rewritten the future of an airline. From seat 7A, the aircraft cruised over the Midwest, slicing through pockets of wind that barely nudged the wings. Most passengers had fallen asleep or pretended to wrapped in thin blankets, bathed in dim cabin glow. But inside the encrypted channels of Cole Meridian's global network, no one was resting, because the order had gone out, and when Jared gave an order, entire systems shifted. At exactly 11:43 p.m. Eastern Time, his legal division in New York received the message flagged Priority 1. Their monitors flashed red, contract portals locked automatically. Pending signatures evaporated from the queue. 2 paralegals looked at each other, eyes wide. Did he just stop the entire deal? Yes. And mid-flight? Yes. Within minutes, a senior counsel initiated the next protocol. Operation Groundfold status. Active documents retracted. Access keys revoked. Audit trails sealed. Joint platform permissions erased in real time. It was clean, clinical, almost surgical, exactly how Jared designed it. Across the ocean, a second team in London was pulled out of bed with emergency alerts. Suspend integration pathways. Prepare reversal statements. Secure all proprietary software packages. The head of European operations rubbed sleep from his eyes and muttered, "Something major happened. He doesn't pull the plug unless moral lines are crossed." Back inside the airplane, Jared watched the cabin lights dim another shade. The atmosphere shifted, subtle but noticeable. Even without knowing why, people sensed change had found its way into the sky. He didn't smile. He didn't frown. He simply tapped his pen once against the edge of his tray table. The rhythm of a man counting seconds until impact. Another message arrived. Rachel. Financial modeling. Updated. Termination will cost them significantly more than they realize. Sending estimates. A PDF appeared precise, cold, merciless. Loss of projected fuel savings. $128M delay cost surge. $64M. Loss of investor confidence. Estimated $180. 220M software licensing disruption. $87M market. Perception risk. Unquantifiable. Total potential damage. $500 million plus. The numbers glowed on the screen like a quiet verdict. Another buzz. Chief Strategy Officer, Tokyo. Initiating freeze on all collaborative projects. Airline requested emergency call. Declined per your directive. Another. Risk management. Analysts predict stock dip within 48 hours once news leaks. Suggest controlled release. Another. Cybersecurity. We've locked them out of the testing sandbox. They tried to log in 14 times. The machine had begun to move, massive, invisible, unstoppable. A global engine responding to the whisper of a single man in row 7. Jared leaned back slightly. The seat creaked. A tired passenger across the aisle glanced at him, unaware he was sitting next to the epicenter of an economic earthquake. From the front of the cabin, Halden erupted again. "This flight's a mess," he complained. "I'm filing a report. These airlines need to learn how to keep standards." A few heads turned away, the discomfort now palpable. Whatever thrill the earlier humiliation brought had soured into something shameful. A flight attendant passed Jared with careful steps, pausing as if she wanted to say something. Apology, recognition, anything, but she kept moving. His phone buzzed again. "Rachel, they're panicking. Board is requesting an immediate explanation." Jared typed slowly. "They'll receive one. Officially." He paused. Then added, "Draft termination notice. Site breach of partnership principles." As the plane cut through the clouds, the world outside remained silent. But inside the airline's corporate ecosystem, alarms were blaring. By the time the aircraft began its gradual descent, the $500 million partnership wasn't just paused. It was collapsing system by system, clause by clause, consequence by consequence. And none of it involved raised voices. None of it involved theatrics. It only required clarity. And a man who had reached the limit of his patience. The plane dipped into its descent pattern, nose angling gently toward the glittering sprawl of the city below. Lights flickered through the windows like constellations scattered across the earth. But inside the cabin, a different kind of illumination was blooming, screens lighting up one by one, notifications cascading like falling dominoes. It started with a single ping. A teenager in row 12 gasped softly. "Yo, this just went viral." He turned his phone slightly. Not enough to be obvious, but enough that half his row caught the thumbnail. Grainy footage of a black man being told to leave first class. The caption, bold and brutal. "Man forced out of his seat because he didn't belong. Airline says it was a mix-up." The video had already hit 600,000 views, then 700,000, then 1,000,000. Passengers leaned in, whispering beneath the hum of the engines. Faces paled, eyes widened. A ripple of shame tightened through the cabin like a cold current. 3 rows ahead, a middle-aged woman whispered to her husband, That's the man behind us, isn't it?" Her husband swallowed. "Looks like it. Another notification exploded across half a dozen screens. Number let him sit. Number flying while black. Number airline disgrace. The hashtags were climbing fast. Someone in economy shouted, "This is trending! It's everywhere!" The murmur rolled forward, up past Comfort Plus, brushing against the velvet curtain of business class like a wave pressing against a dam. Flight attendants exchanged uneasy glances. They knew the tone. They knew the energy. They had seen this unfold before with other airlines, other scandals. But this one was happening in real time, mid-air, with the subject of the world's attention sitting silently in row 7, hands folded, expression unreadable. Another alert pinged loudly, so loud it made 2 passengers jump. A major news outlet posted, "Civil rights groups respond to viral first-class incident, unacceptable." Then a celebrity retweeted it. Then another. And another. The plane interior shifted again, not physically, but emotionally. A cabin that once buzzed with casual superiority now pressed into a quiet, constricted guilt. In first class, Halden finally noticed the whispers. "What's everyone looking at?" he asked, irritation sharpening his voice. A young woman in 3D didn't answer him. Instead, she lifted her phone higher, zooming in on the video still. Her lips parted. "Oh my God," she breathed. "It's you. That's you." She looked down the aisle directly at Jared. A few more heads turned, then a few more. The curtain between cabins suddenly felt flimsy, useless, incapable of protecting entitlement from consequence. Halden's face reddened. "What?" he barked. "What are you all staring at?" But the answer arrived before anyone spoke. Multiple phones dinged with a breaking update. Sources confirm. The man removed from first class is CEO of Cole Meridian, the same company in a $500M partnership with the airline. The silence was instant, heavy, as if the oxygen had been sucked from the cabin at once. A woman covered her mouth. A businessman whispered, "Oh no." A flight attendant froze mid-step, tray trembling in her hands. Halden's bravado cracked visibly. That can't be right," he muttered, voice thinning. Screens were now filled with Jared's name, his company, his achievements, Forbes covers, keynote clips, philanthropic work, images of him shaking hands with world leaders, footage of him delivering supplies during crisis relief, headlines proclaiming him as one of the most influential CEOs in aviation tech. Passengers who had judged him a stranger started seeing him differently, not because of the titles, but because the truth stripped away their assumptions. And the truth was uncomfortably bright. Another alert hit every device simultaneously. Breaking. Cole Meridian halts partnership activities with airline reason undisclosed. Gasps broke across the cabin like scattered glass. Someone whispered, "This is going to destroy them." Another murmured, "500 million, gone." A man in the aisle choked, but over a seat? Jared still hadn't moved, still hadn't looked up. The storm outside the plane was digital, global, explosive. But inside, the eye of that storm sat in perfect stillness, watching the city approach below. He didn't need to announce anything. He didn't need to point fingers. The truth and the world was already doing the work for him. And the airline's empire was beginning to tremble. The wheels touched down with a jarring thud, a shiver running the length of the aircraft as the reverse thrusters roared. A few passengers startled awake, gripping armrests. Others stayed frozen, still glued to the cascade of notifications, painting their screens in outrage and disbelief. The plane taxied slowly, almost painfully, toward the gate. Every second felt like it carried the weight of consequence. And then before the seatbelt sign even turned off, the cabin interphone chimed sharply. A flight attendant picked it up. Her eyes widened. She whispered to her colleague, "They're waiting for him outside." The other swallowed. The board? No, higher. The interphone chimed again. "Crew, doors to arrival and cross-check," the captain announced, his voice tighter than before, as if he too had been made aware of the storm brewing on the ground. Passengers reached for their belongings with trembling hands, but no one stood yet. There was a collective awareness threading through the cabin, an understanding that normal rules no longer applied. The aircraft door cracked open. Cold air rushed in, followed by silence, followed by presence. Three executives in Navy suits stood at the gate, two from the airline's operations team, one from corporate communications. Their badges glinted under the airport fluorescence. Their faces were pale, stiff, already braced for impact. Behind them, a wider crowd was forming: agents, managers, airport police, curious onlookers, cell phones raised like satellites waiting to record the fallout. The curtains separating first class from the rest of the plane swished open. Halden froze mid-reach for his carry-on. The lead executive stepped inside, voice brittle and overly formal. "Mr. Cole? Jared Cole?" The entire cabin tilted metaphorically, emotionally, viscerally toward row 7. Jared rose smoothly, adjusting his jacket with the same calm precision he had shown hours ago when being displaced from his seat. No theatrics, no anger, just presence. Halden blinked hard. "Wait, him? Him?" His voice shook with the first hint of understanding. Passengers watched as the executive stepped closer, posture nearly apologetic. "Sir," he said, "the company would like to extend its sincerest." Jared held up a hand, not rude, just decisive. "I'm heading to my car," he said quietly. The executive swallowed. "Of course, but the board." They urgently request. Jared stepped past him without breaking stride. Aware. A flight attendant tried to speak. "Mr. Cole, if you would allow us." But her voice wavered, and she fell silent under the steady weight of his gaze. The walkway outside the aircraft seemed to constrict around him as he moved, cameras tracking him, employees flattening against the walls to make room. People who had once thought he didn't belong in first class now parted for him as if he carried a royal title. Halden stumbled into the aisle. "This is ridiculous," he sputtered, trying to salvage some fragment of authority. "It was an honest mistake." "I didn't know who you were." Jared paused, turned, looked him in the eye. "You didn't need to know who I was," he said, voice low, steady. "You just needed to know who you were." The words hit Halden harder than any raised voice ever could. A passerby gasped. Another whispered, "He deserved that." The cabin behind them rippled with murmurs. The executive stepped between them, panicked. "Mr. Cole, please. Our chairperson is waiting to speak privately." But Jared shook his head once. "There's nothing private left about this," he replied. He walked down the jet bridge with the kind of quiet authority that rewrites hierarchy. Every step felt like a verdict. At the gate, a journalist called out, "Mr. Cole, is it true the partnership is being canceled?" Another shouted, "Is the airline at risk?" A third, "Do you plan to issue a statement?" Jared didn't slow, but his phone buzzed. A single message from Rachel. "Termination notice ready, awaiting your confirmation." His thumb hovered for 1 second. Then he replied, "Send it." Not shouted, not emotional, just final. A $500 million deal fell into the void of consequence. And the airline had no idea just how far the shockwave would reach. The terminal seemed to hold its breath as Jared walked through it unhurried, composed while the world around him scrambled to comprehend what had just detonated in real time. Behind him, the automatic doors slid shut, swallowing the chaotic chorus of reporters' questions. Ahead, 2 black SUVs idled at the curb, engines humming like loyal sentinels awaiting their commander. But inside the airport, the blast radius of his decision was already expanding. At the airline's operations center, 3 floors above the concourse, panic had erupted like a ruptured steam pipe. Screens flickered with red alerts, phones rang non-stop, and half a dozen executives crowded around a conference table littered with printouts and abandoned coffee cups. A communications director slapped a stack of papers down. "We can't confirm or deny anything, yet legal just froze our outgoing statements." A VP paced the room. "If he pulls out, we lose the entire modernization initiative, fuel, routing, delay, reduction, everything." Someone else whispered the number no one wanted to say aloud. $500 million gone. Down the hall, in the airline's stock monitoring hub, analysts watched in horror as overseas markets responded first. A 3% dip, then 5, then 8. Before anyone in the building could issue an internal memo, financial networks had already blasted the headline. Cole Meridian withdraws from $500M deal airline, faces immediate market shock. The first investor call hit 5 minutes later, then another, then 20 more within the hour. In the employee break room on Concourse C, two flight attendants who weren't on Jared's flight stared at the trending footage. "That's our airline? That's our uniform. And they kicked him out of his seat? God, this is bad." A mechanic returning from shift pulled out his phone. "My cousin works in logistics. Says Coal Meridian is the gold standard. If he's done with us..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The dominoes kept falling. By the time Jared's SUV merged into traffic outside, the airline's internal network sent an all-staff alert. Mandatory emergency. Meeting at 7 a.m. all divisions. No exceptions. People in the airport stopped walking just to read it twice. But the real collapse began at headquarters. In a glass high-rise 20 miles away, the chairman Holt stood in his corner office, tie loosened, jaw clenched hard enough to splinter teeth. His assistant hovered at the doorway. "Sir?" Holt didn't turn. "Tell me someone got him on the phone." "No, sir. He hasn't responded." Holt exhaled through his nose, sharp and controlled. "What about the partnership board? They're calling for an emergency review." "And the investors?" "Sir, the investors are furious." He finally faced her, eyes tired, voice flat. "Furious at us, I assume." "Yes, sir." He dragged a hand through his hair, staring at the city below as if trying to find stability in the gridlocked streets. "We cannot afford to lose him," he muttered, but they already had. At the same time, in a different wing of the building, 3 senior managers sat stiffly while HR placed 2 sealed envelopes in front of them, temporary suspension notices pending investigation. Their faces drained as they recognized the names of the crew involved in the first-class incident. "It's standard procedure," HR told them. But everyone in the room knew it wasn't standard. It was survival. The airline had realized too late who they had humiliated. Meanwhile, online, the storm only intensified. Major outlets posted think pieces. Civil rights groups issued statements. Celebrities recorded reaction videos. Hashtags that began as sparks were now wildfire. Number respect in the skies, number accountability turbulence, number seat 2, a justice. Even frequent flyers loyalists normally immune to outrage joined the chorus. One wrote, "If they can treat him like that, what chance does anyone else have?" Another, "Losing Coal Meridian is catastrophic. Who approved this behavior?" Hours ago, the airline believed they upheld standards. Now, the world saw those standards for what they really were. In the SUV, Jared received a message from Rachel. Press just confirmed. They're calling this the most expensive seat reassignment in aviation history. Jared looked out the window, not satisfied, not triumphant, just resolute. Respect wasn't a perk, it was a boundary, and when people crossed it, consequences followed. Even if they came at 35,000 feet. The city rolled past the SUV windows in blurred ribbons of neon and steel. Rain had begun to fall thin, slanted lines that turned every streetlight into a glowing smear. It was the kind of night that made the world feel quieter, even when it wasn't, the kind of night that made reflection unavoidable. Jared sat in the back seat, hands resting loosely on his lap, watching the drops collect and drift across the glass. Not triumphant, not angry, simply resolved. His phone vibrated once. Rachel. Termination delivered. Board received it. No room for reversal. A second message followed. The chairman tried calling 4 times. We declined. Jared read the words, then locked the screen. He didn't need to see more. The decision had already been made, cleanly, calmly, precisely. The kind of decision that didn't require raised voices or righteous fury. Just clarity. The SUV turned onto a long avenue bordered by offices his company owned. The irony was not lost on him. The airline had tried to reduce him to a seat number while driving past half the skyline he had helped build. Rain pattered against the roof, gentle, steady. Somewhere behind him, that same rain fell on the airline's headquarters, where panic was still unfolding. Because consequences never arrived alone. They arrived in waves. At airline headquarters, the emergency meeting was already underway. The boardroom buzzed with frantic voices, graphs flashing across screens, market analysts waving reports like warning flags. Stock down, 12%. Projected losses, climbing. Partnership portfolios unraveling. Suspended crew members sat in a separate room, heads hung low, being questioned by HR and legal. Some cried, some justified, some simply stared into the middle distance, replaying every word they had said, every assumption they had made. And Halden, the self-proclaimed rightful seat owner, was being escorted out of the corporate lounge after reporters swarmed him. The video of him yelling at staff had surfaced. Organizations he worked with issued statements distancing themselves. His name was now carved beneath headlines he never imagined. Entitled Passenger at Center of $500M Deal Collapse. The empire built on arrogance had started cracking. Not with an explosion, but with a single, quiet decision from a man they underestimated. At a small community center across town. Inside a modest building painted with murals of raised fists and open books, a meeting was taking place. Volunteers circled around laptops, scanners, stacks of financial documents. A director glanced at her inbox and gasped. Everyone look at this. On her screen, $5 million. Incoming transfer sender, Cole Meridian Foundation. Memo. For the kids. For the future. Silence fell. Then joy spilled into the room like light. They didn't know about the airline. They didn't know about 2A. They didn't know about the storm. All they knew was that someone believed in their work. Someone powerful. Someone who remembered where he came from. Back in the SUV, Jared closed his eyes briefly as the rain thickened. His grandmother's voice drifted through memory like a warm current. Dignity is not a luxury, baby. It's a foundation. You guard it like you guard your breath. He inhaled slowly. The weight of the day settled, not heavily, but with purpose. The driver glanced at him through the mirror. Sir, will you be going straight home? Jared opened his eyes again, calm and clear. No. Drive to the hangar. The driver nodded without question. Minutes later, the SUV rolled up beside a sleek private jet, bearing the Cole Meridian crest, a quiet symbol of the world he built with grit rather than inheritance. A lone ground crew member saluted respectfully as Jared stepped onto the tarmac. Wind tugged at his coat, rain catching in the light like shards of silver. He paused at the foot of the stairs, taking in the vast runway stretching into the darkness. This wasn't victory. This wasn't revenge. This was alignment between principle and action, between truth and consequence. He looked up at the plane waiting for him and finally spoke, voice low but firm, respect. That's all it ever had to be. He climbed the steps, unhurried. The jet door closed behind him with a soft hiss. And just like that, quiet, controlled, dignified, he left the chaos on the ground to face the aftermath it created. Because justice didn't need noise, it didn't need spectacle, it didn't need applause. Sometimes, justice was a man walking away calmly from a world that only learned his worth the moment it lost him.